Hey, good morning, church. Good morning to everyone at Shadow Lake and Heritage Ridge and wherever you may be watching from this morning. My name is James. I oversee outreach here at Calvary. Super excited to bring the word to you this morning. We are in this season of impact. We're kind of finishing it up. We've got a couple more weeks. And if you've been here at Calvary for a number of years or even a number of weeks, you've been seeing some of these videos that we've been talking about. The Impact Fund is something that we help raise money for every year, kind of towards the end of the year. And the goal is that it's going to benefit our local community. We've done some things throughout the years of sometimes it's been more global, but this year we try to hyper focus on things that are local. And so when you think of the Sarpy Care Center, that's the food pantry that we do here on site at our Bellevue location. It's the diapers that we distribute. It's the Papillion clothing closet. It's the mental health initiatives that we're a part of. It's the counseling offices that we do. It's the biggest way that our church family impacts the community on a day-to-day basis. And so that's kind of what we've been raising money for. If you want to learn more about some of those initiatives and what those look like, if you haven't been around, you can go to calvary.ch/impact. It'll tell you about all the projects. I think we have about 16 different total projects that are kind of represented in this. And we had a goal for $400,000 total that we believe in order to fully fund all these things for this next year. And so we want to give an update about where we're at. We were at $300,000 of our $400,000 goal. I think that's something worth celebrating this morning. This fund is open until January 11th, so we've got about 2 more weeks. And if this is something that maybe you've kind of waited to see like what it looks like, I'll tell a story a little later about it, but I can't imagine something more valuable to give towards the end of the year is the Impact Fund. When you think about the amount of people that it's impacted, we've distributed over 80,000 pounds of food and 60,000 diapers. And when it comes to the clothing closet, I believe there's been about like 40,000 pieces of clothing that have been distributed to our community. This is something that is becoming a part of the lifeblood of our community, and this is what it takes to make that happen. So we hope that you would partner with us in that. But I'm going to pray, and then we're going to roll into today's message. But God, you were good. God, we're so grateful for the opportunity to come into this space together. God, I pray that you would say something fresh to us today, that we would be encouraged and equipped to go into this new year ready to roll, ready to take some next steps with you. God, you're good all the time. It's in your name we pray. Amen. So a lot of things happened this calendar year, 2024. We had an election. A lot of things made headlines in the news. But this morning, I want to share a couple things that maybe you didn't know. They made the news, but just maybe not the news that you were watching. And so the first thing, there is a woman in Australia who won the world's ugliest lawn competition. The thing is, she didn't know she signed up for the world's ugliest lawn competition. The competition came to her door. So it started in rural Sweden as a way to try to, in kind of like the rural parts of Sweden, to try to get people to conserve water, let natural grasses grow, let animals come into the yard. Don't worry about having a super good looking yard. A bunch of other countries kind of adopted and became a part of this competition. You have the Australia, Canada, United States. And then this poor lady in Australia found out that she won. If this was me, I'd be like, sitting on my couch, eating Cheetos, and all of a sudden someone knocks at the door. You're like trying to like act like you've been doing something. You go out there and they give you this big award that basically says you are the worst at keeping your lawn nice. So I bet they thought it was a compliment to her, but maybe she took it as an insult. Not really sure. The next one is there was a 3-year-old that was claiming to hear monsters in the walls, and they told their parents about it. I've got a 3-year-old. If they said mom, I'd be like, you're crazy. And so they told this, and then they eventually got someone to come and do one of those thermal imaging cameras. Turns out it was 50,000 bees in the wall of this toddler's room. And so at that point, if you just see 50,000 bees, that is equivalent to one monster. I don't know what the ratio is, but that feels like a pretty good comparison. 50,000 bees equals one mythological monster. So that's kind of where we're at. The next one, Vermont State University. There's a family that lives right off campus. This cat every day for years. I think it's been like 6 years, just goes every day, hangs out at campus. People pet the cat. They love the cat. They feed the cat, all the things. Cat goes home. Vermont State University gave this cat a doctorate in literature. They thought they were really clever when they came up with that. They're like, what if we gave a cat a doctorate in literature? The sad thing is that on paper, that cat is now more educated than all of us. So that's kind of brutal, unfortunately. This last one, there was a 6-foot-long alligator named Wally. Wally was working with a trainer for years and years. He eventually became an emotional support alligator. He would go visit nursing homes, which to me that is like Dad, you're playing with fire there, right? So he would go visit nursing homes. He met with the mayor of Philadelphia. I don't know what they talked about when they met, but apparently that was something that the mayor of Philadelphia did. Turns out, while they were in Georgia, there was someone called for like a pest, pest line or something. Someone comes out, grabs Wally, releases him into the Georgia swamp, and Wally is now missing. So if you see a 6-foot alligator that looks like it has great people skills, we know a guy looking. But the thing about that story, I'll be honest, I think it's a little funny because I cannot think about an alligator going into a nursing home and all that stuff without just thinking about Happy Gilmore. I just can't think of like that whole alligator scene in that movie and stuff. And it's just like, that's where we are. So maybe these are some of the headlines that you missed in 2024. For some people, I know maybe 2024 was a great year. Maybe you had an incredible year. It was great. You had some really cool milestones happen, and you're maybe looking forward to 2025, or maybe something's gonna have to end and something's gonna have to change in 2025, and maybe you're not looking forward to that. I know for a lot of people in our church family, 2024 was a hard year, physically, mentally, emotionally. It took a toll on a lot of us, and there's a lot of tension in our lives, and maybe we're hoping that the new year provides a new opportunity for something different. And the thing about years is, as each year kind of feels like nothing changes, right? December 31st to January 1st, but it feels like an opportunity for a fresh start. Maybe you go buy new calendars and you're like, I'm gonna get a new notebook, I'm gonna be more organized, right? You maybe set some goals, all those things. But when you think about years, I could say some different years and maybe you would have some memories pop up. So maybe for 2024, you would have some. If I were to say 2001, I think we would all have probably a similar memory of a big thing that happened in 2001. Maybe for you in 2008, when the housing market crashed, you might have some memories from then, or maybe from 2015 or 2017, or just as you start to think about years throughout your life, you kind of start to think about memories and associate memories with time. And so today we're going to be talking about, as we're entering into a new year, regardless of how your year has been and regardless of what you're hoping this next year brings, but I think we could all agree that this next year, it will be a new year, but we worship and serve the same God. And so I want us to take hope today that it will be a new year, but we're worshiping the same God. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because we have to have a foundation to come back to. We have to have a rock that's kind of guiding and leading us. And we're going to kind of take a journey in the story of Exodus. Exodus is the second book of the Bible. It is probably one of the most influential stories all throughout the church history, Christian history. If you were to talk about people, right, like before Jesus, people had scrolls, you had to go to temples to hear it, and it was a part of an oral tradition. If anyone of the people of God knew a single story, it was the story of how God had brought them out of slaves from Egypt and took them to the promised land. That is the story that people could hang their hats on and say, that time when God he kept his promises, he answered our prayers, he showed up in a miraculous way, and God is with us. It's that Exodus story. And so we're gonna kind of see how we can take some hope in knowing that we're going to this next year with the same God. But if you're new to church, or maybe you don't think about this too often, when we say the same God, what is it that we're exactly talking about? What is it about God that is not going to change? And so we're actually gonna go a little bit towards the end of the Exodus story to start our time and see how this God reveals himself to the people of Israel and how he tells them, this is who I am. This is who I was, this is who I am, and this is who I will be forever. And we find that in Exodus 34, chapter 6. It says, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. When you read those words, sometimes it's easy just to be like, okay, cool. Like that's who God says he is. That's really awesome. And Scott, our lead pastor, kind of alluded to this a few weeks ago. Sometimes it's easy to read things in the Bible and believe them to be true for lots of people, but really hard for us to believe that they're actually true for me. And so if we go back through this same exact passage, when you think about how God looks at you, if we were to think like God is looking at you right now, do you think that he has compassion for you? Do you think that God has mercy for you? Do you think that God is slow to anger with you all the time? Do you think that God has unfailing love for you? There's nothing that can separate you from God's love from you? And that God is faithful to you? When you start to break them down into these different things and you think like, well, this is who God says he is, but do I believe that God is that for me? I think for some of us in this room, that might actually be a hurdle to us receiving what God has for us today, is believing that God is, yes, he's those things, but he's also those things for you. He's those things for your neighbor. He's those things for the people that you think are very far from God and might never come into a relationship with God. He's also those things. I think we can struggle to see God viewing us in that way because in our deepest heart, we know that we are not that way. When we go through these things, we know we do not show compassion the way that we should. We don't often lean, our gut instinct is not to show mercy to people, right? You've probably heard people say like they got what's coming to them, or like we want people to get what they deserve. But mercy is not giving someone what they do deserve. And God leans towards mercy. The story of the Bible is leaning towards mercy. And sometimes we know that we are not that way with people. We know that we are not slow to anger. If you think you're slow to anger, or one, you should ask the people around you because they might have something else to say. But you can go onto your social media, you can see it, and people are angry all the time about something, right? People are not slow to anger. We are very quick to get angry. We do not have failing love for people. Sometimes if there's tension in relationships and hard things, sometimes it's just easier to walk away and stop talking to that person than it is to go through the pain of reconciliation and working it out, right? And seeing a resolution. It can just be easier to be like, it's just not worth it, or nothing's gonna change. And we also know that we're not faithful. And so why do we take time to break this down? I want to take this revelation of who God is and who we can tend to be, and we're going to go back and we're going to read the story of the Exodus, and we're going to see how people responded. And one thing that I think is so fascinating about the Bible is that this story that we're going to be talking about was about 3,500 years ago, and the way that people respond in the story are the exact same way that we respond to situations in our life. We are not unique. We are not different. Maybe we have different technology and we feel like we're a lot smarter than them. But at the same time, we are human beings and we struggle with the same exact things. And so we're going to see that come true today. And so these people of Israel have been enslaved for 400 years. That is generation after generation, probably about 16 generations of slaves under the biggest political and social and like military force power of its day, Egypt. And I imagine that there's people that have been like, they've probably, I do not believe in the God of our ancestors, the God of Abraham that we've grown up hearing about. If God is real, he's indifferent to our struggle. He doesn't care about us. If anything, maybe he's getting joy out of the suffering that we have. I do not believe in God. And I imagine that it would be very easy for this to spread amongst the people of God during this time. 400 years. That's 400 years of people feeling like God's not hearing their prayers. 400 years of feeling like this is their lot in life. This is what they deserve. And then all of a sudden you see this character, Moses. He comes back onto the scene. He was an Israelite, but then he murdered someone, ran off into the wilderness. They thought he was going to be the savior. He's actually back, and he's demanding in front of Pharaoh, and then in the name of the God of Abraham, this God that we have heard about and that we've believed in, that he's saying, if you don't let us go, that horrible things are going to happen. And then they watch the story of the 10 plagues unfold, and they yank them out. And while Pharaoh is still holding his firstborn son, the one that Yahweh has just taken his life, because he took all the firstborn son's life in all of Egypt, if they didn't observe the Passover. And so Pharaoh was still mourning the loss of his son, says, get out, and they leave. And now they're in the desert. And life is pretty rough in the desert. It's super hot during the day. It's very cold at night. Nothing grows. It's brutal. If you like going to the beach, the sand is the worst part. If you don't believe me, imagine being in sand for like 400 years, right? Like generation, like all the time. You try to leave the beach. The beach is great. Sand at the beach is great, but then you leave and you take half the beach with you every time, right? It's brutal. Sand is not fun, but more importantly, nothing grows in a desert. If you were to ask me how I was doing and I was like, it just feels like I'm going through a desert right now, you would know that I'm talking about I'm not doing well. If I were to say I'm in a relational desert with my family, or if I'm in I feel like I've been in a spiritual desert for a long time, you would know that things are not going well and nothing thrives in the desert. But there is something that I think God is trying to teach these people that we're going to find out in the story today. There's a lesson that he's trying to teach the people of God. And I don't think that they actually ever learned that lesson. And it's the same lesson I think God wants us to learn as we get ready to head into the new year. And the lesson is this: it's that would you rather be a slave to what you know, or would you rather be with God in the unknown? Would you rather be a slave to what you know, or do you want to be a slave in Egypt, or do you want to be with God in the desert? And what we know about deserts, you're like, maybe I should weigh the options. But today we're going to look at, what does it look like to be in the desert with God? What does it look like to be in the desert with God? So let's find out. In Exodus 13, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. If they were faced with battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. I think it's super interesting that God knows the hearts of the people. He knows where they're at emotionally, mentally, honestly, probably even physically. Like, they are not ready to go up against something difficult, so I'm not going to lead them towards the Philistines. If you don't know the Philistines, this is the David and Goliath story. Goliath, he was a Philistine. These are these people. And so God's saying, like, I'm going to go around and I'm going to protect them. And it can be really easy in our lives to look around and think that we're doing the heavy lifting when we're not looking to how God is actually working and moving in our lives. The first thing that we see is in the desert, God protects. God's protecting them from things that they don't even know are issues. And we're gonna see that God is protecting them for things that actually come and face them head on. In the desert, God protects. That is what God is seeking to do. But what I think is really cool is if you follow that next sentence in Exodus 13, at the second part of verse 18, it says the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. So if you put those two things together, it says if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. But it says the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. They thought they were ready for battle. They thought they were ready to go. They just saw God do all of these miraculous miracles, and Pharaoh told them to get out, and they're like, we're ready to go to war, right? Sometimes we, in the church world, when we like send students and stuff to camps, we call it like, we send camps to Christ and Youth. It's called CIY. We call it the CIY high, right? They come back and they're ready to run through a brick wall for Jesus. And then if you wait a little bit, it might start to wear off a little bit, because then it's like the day-to-day of actually living your life it doesn't feel that easy. And I'm not picking on young people in the room. Adults, we do the same thing too. Sometimes it's with the new year, or like, I'm gonna turn over a new spiritual leaf. I'm gonna stop these habits. I'm gonna do different things. And maybe it works for a little bit, but then our willpower kind of fades away, and then we're kind of left right where we started. Right, this is what it looks like. They're like, we're ready to go. We're ready to run through a brick wall. I guess they're leaving Egypt, so they're like, we're gonna run through a pyramid for God, right? They're like, we're gonna go do this thing. So let's see what happens when they go to, quote unquote, do this thing, right? In Exodus 14, it says, as Pharaoh approached, so Pharaoh changes his mind. He says, actually, I'm gonna kind of miss a lot of that slave labor. Let's go get him back. It says the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after him. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone and let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. So the people that came up ready for battle, as soon as something happens, they're like, this is it. I'm just gonna bury myself in the sand, right? Just gonna ostrich it and just call it a day. These people that thought they were ready for battle instantly regret it. And if you see what they said at the end, they kind of answered, I think, the lesson that God was trying to teach them. Would you rather be in the desert with God or be a slave to what you know? And they literally say, it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians, so be slaves in Egypt, than to be with God in the unknown. And so this is the first time you see them kind of confronted with this question. But we are the same exact way. When things get difficult in our lives, we stop seeking God. We disconnect from the vine, right? And the New Testament talks about how God is the vine and we are the branches, and we should stay connected to the vine. This is the result of not staying connected to the vine, is that when things pop up in our lives, we feel like everything's attacking us. The second thing that happens in the desert is that God guides. In Exodus 13, it says, by day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place from the people. I've been to Cairo. I've seen the pyramids. I've been to the desert. The pyramids sit at the very edge of like the city, and they're up on a plateau. And actually, the city of Cairo, there's a dam, so it used to flood every year, and water would run up basically right up to these long paths called causeways, right up to the pyramids. And this is about the area that all this would have taken place. And past that was desert for miles and miles and miles. And so actually, I was in Cairo, I was in Egypt of the day that all that stuff happened in Gaza last October. So I was actually only 200 miles away from where the conflict had originally started at the exact time it started, but it's 200 miles of just desert. So if you wanted to drive and take it, it's over an 8-hour drive because you have to go around the desert because there's nothing there except hills and miles of sand and wilderness. And so as they're getting ready to go into the desert, God is going to guide them with a giant cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And that might be like, oh, that's great. They can see it either way. I would imagine hopefully, maybe during the hot days, that cloud actually provided a lot of shade. Another way that God is providing for them and protecting them. And then by night, when it gets really cold in the desert, you have a pillar of fire that is probably providing some warmth as well. But even more than that, I would imagine maybe stories and word got out because Egypt was the biggest power of the day. When you hear that basically they face this big, massive blow and all these people leave, that it sounds like, hey, there's actually some people, and the Bible tells us that Egyptians were giving them stuff as they go. They're like, take our gold, leave, just get out of here. And so the idea of maybe there's this large group of people in the middle of the desert with a lot of valuable items, and they're not good at fighting. It'd be like, this is a pretty easy fight, right? You can just like take their lunch money and go home. Imagine being in the military of a different surrounding nation or kingdom. And then you go to like try to sneak up on them in the middle of the night and there's a giant pillar of fire there defending them. I'd be like, I signed up for the wrong job, right? A lot of people in the military here, right? You spend like 20 years to get like the full benefits. And you're like, I got to do what now for 20 years? I got to fight this pillar of fire? That's brutal, right? God wants to guide us in the desert, and he's going to do so in some miraculous ways that we maybe don't understand. But the question is, are we following? God wants to guide you when you're in spiritual deserts, when you're in emotional deserts, when you're in relational deserts. But do you want to take matters into your own hands, or do we want to follow God? One of the things that happens is, I said we were kind of the same as these people. And when they left and Pharaoh starts pursuing them and their backs are up against the Red Sea and everyone's complaining that they're gonna die, Moses starts yelling to the people, the Lord will win this battle for you today. All you need to do is be still. And it's very, very hard for us as human beings to be still. And I don't even think it's because of bad intentions. Right? If there's a financial struggle in your life or a relational struggle, we tend to like hold on tighter because we're trying to solve the problem. We don't want people to think we're lazy. We don't want people to think that we're not trying. And so we try to do everything ourselves. But in that moment, we're like, well, then I don't have time to pray. I don't have time to ask my small group for prayer. I don't have time to show up to small group, or I don't have time to read my Bible. It's the things we say that the first thing is that we don't have time to be still. God is trying to guide us through the deserts in our lives. Are we willing to be still? Are we willing to be still and say, hey, actually the best thing that I can do in this situation is to first wait and hear from the Lord? And that goes against all of our culture that we live in. It goes against our gut reaction, but that's what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. We forget who's guiding you when we were focused on the obstacles in our life. When the obstacles are there in our lives, it can be really, really difficult to see past them. But what obstacles in our lives this year do you feel like you need to remove so that you can see how God is clearly guiding you in your life? I think there's all of us that have distractions or things, or maybe it's the voices that we listen to or the people that we're allowing to speak into our lives. What are some of the things that we need to remove from our lives so that God can guide us clearly? The last thing that we see God do in the desert is God provides. God provides. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, then there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Let me take a quick pause there. They were slaves for 400 years and they're making it sound like they're at an all-you-can-eat buffet every day, right? It's funny how sometimes when there's negative things in our life, like when we look back on them, sometimes we pull out the things that are actually the lies. We believe the lies from our lives. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat in the morning and you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. I think that then is a super interesting word. God has already done the 10 plagues, brought them out of Egypt. He had already separated the waters. They went across it. I already skipped over the part where actually they came across bitter water. And God told Moses, well, if you take this piece of wood and put it in it, the water will be safe to drink. And then he allowed them to stay at, basically it had 7 springs and like palm trees all around. And that's where they camped for a while. God let them go to a little vacation resort, and then people are like saying like, God's not gonna feed us, he wants us to die. And God's like, then they will know that I'm God. I think that then is doing some heavy lifting, and it's God saying like, I'm hoping that they finally get it. And they don't. And as we read the Bible, as we read this story in the Bible, I think a big thing that the author is wanting us to get is like it's so easy to fall into the trap of complaining and feeling like God is not doing the things you want him to do. But if we're intentional and we look through how God has provided, protected, and guided us throughout our life, if you take note of those moments, then the picture becomes clearer and you can say, no, God has protected me. God has guided me, and God has provided me. A little bit, it kind of feels like I've got a 3-year-old, and I think we accidentally, I don't know if you've heard like, like the dogs that salivate, right? That whole kind of psychology thing. We accidentally did that to our kids, and it was a big mistake, okay? So after church, they get out of like, the 402 kids and stuff, or the Calvary kids stuff on Sunday mornings, and instantly they're like, I gotta have a snack. And if you're around my kids right after they get out, they start to like lose it. And I was like, we've accidentally conditioned our kids to like, they're like, and I was like, you ate probably 20 minutes ago, because they do snacks and kids ministry stuff. I was like, you just ate. And they're like, I'm starving. And it's like, these kids are dramatic, right? I think the author of Exodus is trying to give us in some of the gossip of like, these people are dramatic. They're always thinking that they're about to die, as if God's not the God that got them this far, as if he's not gonna take them to the next step. God has gotten you this far. He's not gonna leave you now. He's gonna take you to the next step. When you're in the desert, whether emotional, physically, financially, God has gotten you this far. He's going to take you to the next step. That is who God is. I think that we face a really difficult challenge in our culture, in Western culture, being Americans. I think we have a really hard, it's an uphill battle to trust that God will provide for us. And it's not because of anything God's doing, but I think it's just the culture that we live in. When Amazon Prime does 2-day shipping, who's got Amazon? Who uses Amazon? I'm not shaming you. I use it too, okay? Yeah. When the 2-day shipping came out, it was like a game changer, right? You're like, this can get here in 2 days. And if you use Amazon, we've got a fulfillment center. We've got like a regional one here. There's things that you can get in 1-day shipping or same-day shipping. I can order something at 8 o'clock and it will be at my house that evening. That feels illegal, right? That is an insane amount of efficiency. And it's funny because after getting some things on like 1-day shipping or same-day shipping, and then you find out the fastest that Amazon can do it is 2 days, you're like, what the heck? I gotta wait 2 days for this now, right? When I was a kid, my mom did bidded for things on eBay, right? eBay's still around. Who used eBay back in the day, right? Okay, so a couple people used eBay. You can sell things on it, people bid. If you still use eBay out there, good for you. You have patience that not many Americans have anymore. I certainly don't. But my mom ordered me a little Transformer toy. And as a kid, it was, it's the cars that turns into the robot, the whole thing. And it said it was gonna take 2 to 3 weeks to get to our house. And I remember thinking, I'm going to die before that toy gets to my house, right? And I remember I went out the next day and I checked the mailbox. I knew it wasn't gonna be there, but I was like, maybe they lived close and they just dropped it off, right? You're like trying to rationalize as a kid. But I think it's really important to see what's the things in culture that guide things that we actually believe about God. And when we live in a culture where you can have truly anything at your fingertips all the time through your smartphone, we have access to anything. And when we don't get that instant gratification, we expect God to answer prayers like a microwave, like you just push the buttons and wait a couple seconds and it's ready. People waited in slavery for 400 years for God to rescue them out. And I think if some of us had to wait 4 days, we would be thinking that God doesn't care about us. It's an uphill battle in our culture to trust that God will provide for us. And there's actually a lot of safeguards in the Bible that help lean you towards trusting that God will provide for you. One of the things that we do as followers of Jesus, the Bible tells us that we should be tithing 10% of our income back to God. By our culture, this is the weirdest, most backwards practice that you can imagine, is that I should take 10% of my income and give it back to God. One, as followers of Jesus, we say it all belongs to God anyway, so I'm giving a portion of it back. But when you tithe, it kind of does two things in your heart. It says that, hey, that the things that my income, my salary, that the way that I make money, it does not define me as a human being. It's not my self-worth is not tied up into it, and it has nothing to do with that. But also, it helps you know that God, I need you to provide in my life. I need you to show up in my life. And that is something that is so backwards in our culture. If you call Calvary your church home, if you do not practice that rhythm of giving, I want to challenge you to participate in the Impact Fund this year. There was a guy this last week, he met with Rusty, the campus pastor here at Bellevue, and he just wanted to reach out to him, and he goes, hey, a couple years ago, I came to your guys' food pantry here and had a conversation with someone, and we started talking for a while, and I asked if I could have a Bible, and they went and got me one, and we talked through some things, they gave me some food, and I've been gone for a while, but I just wanted to come back and say thank you and how much that impacted my life. This is like scratching the surface on the impact that our church is able to have through the Impact Fund. People's lives are being changed weekly. We are helping people through physical, emotional, and spiritual deserts. And the goal of the Impact Fund and the things that we do through the clothing closet, the food pantry, diapers, and all the different initiatives that go is to help bring the kingdom of heaven to earth now. In our community, there's a lot of people that are living every day in deserts, and the Impact Fund is to try to help create an oasis and some palm trees in that area. We know when we started the Impact Fund years ago, I don't think we would have worded it that way, but in reality, that's what it gets to do. And so the reason why I bring this up is because the only time that that God says, test me in this, is with generosity. Is we're saying, trust that I will provide for you and watch how the floodgates open. It's not that it's like a slot machine that you can, if I put 10% of my income, I hit the magic wheel, all the sevens come up, and God has sevenfolded my income, right? This is not a God pyramid scheme, okay? But it's trusting that God will provide. And when you do that, I can think of countless examples of how God has provided in unique and unexpected ways in my life. Not just financially, but other ways that have shown up, where God has shown up in some really, really powerful ways. God has always been there to protect, guide, and provide for us in our lives. And it's truly on us to see if we are intentional with seeing that. As we head into a new year, is there going to be anything different in your life to see how God is protecting you, how God is guiding you, and how God is providing for you? What are the obstacles we need to remove? What's the things we need to realign? What's the things we need to refocus on so that we can move into a new year with new challenges, maybe new opportunities, but trusting that God is going to be there every step of the way and that God is the same. We are worshiping the same God, and he's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In chapter 15 of Exodus, right after God protects them from the Egyptians as they're chasing after them again, they say that they sing a song of deliverance. And I want to read the first few verses of it. It says, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled both horse and rider into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has given me victory. This is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. Yahweh is his name. I think some of us in our church family, I know we're waiting for a song of deliverance. We're hoping to be able in 2025 to sing the praises of the way that God has rescued people from disease and from financial hardship and from mental health challenges, where some of us could just use this song of deliverance in our life. And just like the Exodus story, we have to remember how God has shown up in some pretty miraculous ways. And similar to the Exodus story, there has been someone years later from this story, but about 2,000 years ago from now, there was someone that did come to free people from being slaves. And it's not slaves to a political power, it's not slaves to a physical, to a world power, but it's slaves to ourselves and slaves to the power of sin in our life. The Bible tells a story about how sin has the ability to separate us from God, and it literally enslaves us. But because of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, that we are broken from the bondage of sin. As sin used to have the power to keep us away from God, and now it does not have that anymore. And that is why we celebrate Jesus' birth at Christmas and why we celebrate his death at Easter. Because that is how God has miraculously shown up in your life. If you've not taken the opportunity to think about what Jesus' life, death, and resurrection means for you, we'd love to have that conversation. There's nothing greater that you can try to figure out in 2025 than your relationship with God. If you find yourself in a desert today, we'd love to pray for you. We'd love to talk with you. We'd love to find ways that we can walk alongside you. But God is there to protect. God is there to guide you. And God is there to provide for you every step of the way. We're going to end today's services with actually kind of singing our own song of deliverance. There's a song, it's got a familiar tune. It's kind of been a little bit rewritten. But the purpose of the song of deliverance is to say who God is and what God has done. And today we're going to sing a song about who Christ is and what Christ has done. And so I'm going to pray, and then I ask that you would stand and sing this last song with us. God, you are good. God, we are so grateful for the ways that you have shown up in our lives. God, I pray that we would be intentional in this new year to believe that you are the same God. You are not the one that is changing. We are the moving target. God, I pray that we'd be humble enough to see the ways that you are, the things that you might be asking us to give up in our lives, the things that you might be asking us to change. And I pray that we would be bold enough to take some steps towards you today before we even leave here. God, I pray that we'd be humble enough to share with our small groups the things that we need to change, the things that we need to take steps forward with you, and the things that need to be different in our life so that we can see how you are present. God, thank you for being the same God yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Amen.